Towards the end of World War II, the Japanese knew they were screwed. They might not have known they were about to enter previously unknown, new experimental levels of screwed, but with resources and manpower dwindling, aerial and naval supremacy lost, the Japanese knew conventional warfare would not bring them victory. But no way would they surrender. Japan at this time had a society that idealized self-sacrifice, honor, and courage, traits that by themselves sound positive, but only ever seem to turn up in these highly militaristic societies, where they're just euphemisms for how dying in battle is cool and good. Evolution has given one critical goal to every living creature: survive at any cost. It doesn't matter what happens before or after you're alive, just that you're alive. Humans have somehow reached a point in our evolution where we can convince ourselves this is not the case, and that concepts like discipline, religion, and karma can be more important than being alive. In a society that has adopted such ideas, it is possible to convince a man, a living creature, to risk his life for these concepts, and the man will do it, although he'll generally try his best to avoid death in the process, and will likely surrender when faced with a choice between death and his ideals. But World War II Japan was full of fighting men who were so committed to their ideals that they would willingly throw themselves into the jaws of death to avoid the shame of defeat or failure. A choice that seems evolutionarily obvious. Shame doesn't actually harm you in any way, and death kills you. Perhaps this just didn't bother the men of Japan's Special Attack Units of World War II. Formed from the Imperial Japanese Navy and Army mid-1944, the units were deployed to attack the enemy in operations in which they were not expected to survive. In other words, they blew themselves up, with the basic idea being it was worth the sacrifice of one man to cause more damage than he could have while surviving. The most famous example being, of course, the Kamikaze, or Divine Wind, attacks, where Japanese pilots would simply ram their aircraft into Allied naval vessels. During World War II, about 3,800 kamikaze pilots blew themselves up in attacks that killed over 7,000 Allied naval personnel and sank dozens of warships. Kamikaze craft were mostly modifications to existing warplanes, removing the guns and mounting extra explosives, but there were a few purpose-built kamikaze planes. The Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka, or Cherry Blossom, was one such craft, although it was really more of a piloted bomb than an airplane. The unpowered glider would be carried underneath a larger bomber, which would fly it to its target before releasing the Oka and the man on board. Did I say unpowered? Well, the Oka would glide down to its target, but when in range, the pilot would fire up the rocket engine and ensure his final approach was fast as hell and couldn't be stopped. Yes, it had a rocket engine, with which the Oka was able to achieve speeds of up to 1,000 kilometers per hour as it dived into warships. The Oka saw combat in the Battle of Okinawa in 1945, where several Okas were responsible for sinking Allied ships. The Allies derisively referred to the Okas as baka bombs, baka being the Japanese word for idiot. Well, fair enough. Imagine someone is asking you what your job on the plane is, and you're like, I ride the bomb. There's something morbidly humorous about a bomber pilot sitting with a button that just releases from hundreds of feet in the air and to their assured demise. Some dude he probably knows quite well. Not all special attack units were based in the air. The Shinyo, or Sea Quake, was a small motorboat with up to 300 kilograms of explosives mounted to its bow. It could reach about 55 kilometers per hour and would be driven by one man who'd crash into a warship and detonate on impact. Another water-based craft was the Chiton, or Heaven Shaker. Like the Oka, it was really more of a manned bomb, or in this case, torpedo. It was fired from a submarine or surface ship, and the Chiton's pilot would try to steer the vessel into enemy ships. Now, the Oka was pretty much guaranteed death once fired. Even if you missed your target, you were going to hit the ground rather hard. The Shinyo didn't have that problem. If you missed, you could just turn around and try again, or do the sensible thing and sail off into the sunset. But what about the Chiton? Was the pilot doomed as soon as he stepped inside, or was there room for error? Nah, he was doomed. Once the hatch was sealed, that was it. It didn't open from the inside. The pilot would never leave the chitin once it was fired, and it had a self-destruct control for the pilot to use if his attack failed. Of all the special attack units, the chitin came second only to the Kamikaze in terms of effectiveness and kill ratio, which tells you a lot about the special attack units because the chitin were terrible. While they did sink ships and kill about 200 Allied servicemen, their failures dwarfed their successes. The chitin was prone to failure and would sometimes leak or explode, killing test pilots and trainees. Even the inventor of the chitin, Lieutenant Hiroshi Kuroki, was not safe from his own weapon. In one of the very first training missions during development, Kuroki said, "Watch this, lads," before diving in a chitin and never resurfacing. Kuroki was found suffocated in his chitin at the bottom of the sea, along with a note he had written in his last moments, which detailed what had gone wrong, how to fix it, and his love for his family. The special attack units had another underwater role, as if the chitin wasn't bad enough. The fukuryu, or crouching dragon divers, had no vehicle at all. They were just given a diving suit and a mine on the end of a bamboo pole. They would lie in wait at the bottom of the beach for hours, subsisting on liquid food. If a landing craft passed overhead, they would use the stick to detonate the mine against the hull. If they were lucky, they'd have a concrete shelter to protect them, but they were largely expected to die. Thankfully, the war ended before the fukuryu were deployed, but several had been killed during training. Another grim role was that of the shimbu-tai, or Suicide Corps, which was not technically part of the special attack units, but was inspired by them. In the Japan-occupied Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia, the Empire of Japan enlisted locals to the shimbu-tai to ward off the anticipated Allied invasion of the Indonesian islands. Shimbu-tai members were ordinary native Indonesians with little to no military background. They were not paid or given weapons. Leaders of shimbu-tai groups would be given a bomb. They would then direct one of their men to take the bomb and stand beside something expensive. You know what would look good on that tank? You. The shimbu-tai's tactics remained in use even after World War II had ended, as the Indonesians employed them during the Indonesian National Revolution, blowing themselves to bits fighting the Dutch and British. As for the Japanese, well, the special attack units were obviously a failure, and are remembered less as a statistically significant military movement and more as a representation of the dogged Japanese fighting spirit, fiercely committed to the bitter, desperate end, even when defeat is inevitable. Then they were nuked. Twice. Finally, Japan said, "Enough of this death before dishonor bullshit. I want to live." And then they surrendered. They finally gave up, accepting not just the shame of defeat, but the shame of accepting defeat. They had already given up hope of winning, now they had even given up the hope of a glorious lost cause, and given up the hope that the men who had chosen to make the ultimate sacrifice for them had not done so in vain. But they had, and life moved on. It turned out it was better to live in shame than to not live at all, and so they produced anime. The moral of the story is, dying with honor is functionally the same as dying without honor, so it's best to live like a coward. And try not to give your life to prevent something that ends up happening anyways. That seems like it would require clairvoyance to achieve, but it really only takes not agreeing to give your life away in the first place. If you liked this video, I've made many more that you can watch whenever you so please, and you can subscribe to see new ones as they're released. You can join the channel membership to support me monetarily, and until next time, stay safe.
The rocket craft is carried underneath a bomber and released near our fleet. The suicide pilot then flies it into a target. The Japanese have also used standard aircraft on suicide missions without any special training for the pilots, many of whom are shot down or lose their nerve. The rocket bombs, however, carry pilots trained and dedicated to self-destruct.